Joanna Naugle, editor of The Bear. You worked on season one. So what were your discussions with Chris Storer like for season two now that you guys have established the style and the pace of the show?
Yeah, it was so fun to come back and feel like we already knew the characters. We had already kind of established the visual language. So coming back for season two, we really just wanted to elevate things. And I think season one focused so much on Carmi and Sydney and Richie, like they were kind of our main trio. And the thing I loved about season two is we got a chance to highlight some of the other characters that I think audience members had really fallen in love with, but we just didn't have time in season one. So we really get to know Marcus more, we get to know Sugar more, we introduce some new characters as well. And so we really just were trying to, show the team coming together and kind of everyone went on their own journeys, kind of became better at all their crafts, and then came together to create this new restaurant, work on something. And at the end of the day, it's a show about teamwork and a show about people coming together. And I love that we have such a great ensemble of characters and actors to draw on because everyone's just so lovable and you're rooting for them all along the way.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that was one of the things I love about season two. Like, there were so many character-focused episodes about the supporting characters, like Honeydew for Marcus, and obviously Forks for Richie. And the editing style of those episodes are also different from the general Bear style. So what did you guys discuss about, adjusting the style for each character?
Yeah, that was definitely something we had to figure out in the edit room. Marcus's episode, Honeydew, that was directed by Rami Youssef. So it was great to kind of have somebody new come in who knows Chris and knows me and Josh and a lot of people, but brought his own kind of style and take on Marcus's material. And I co-edited that with Adam Epstein, who also has worked on the show since season one. And at first we were cutting things really fast, we had all this loud music, and we're trying to make it really feel like the Bear. And then once we started talking to Chris Storer, the creator of the show, about it, he was like, no, Marcus's episode, this should be meditative, this should be slow. Like even in the crazy chaos at the restaurant, Marcus is always like an island of calm, like he really centers everyone. So we really had to kind of fight our instincts of being like, okay, we want this to feel like it's within the universe of the show, but also feel like we have more time to breathe, focus a little bit more on the processes, on, Marcus taking his time, learning how to become a better pastry chef from Luca. So it was really fun to find that balance. And kind of similarly, the episode before is kind of more Sydney's journey, and we shot that more documentary style with our friends at Supper Club. And so that was almost more open-ended. We wanted to just feel like we were like kind of on the journey with Sydney and seeing like her method of inspiration. And then obviously she comes back to the restaurant and she sees that Carmi's been doing all this stuff without her. So that was also kind of the starting point where it showed Carmi kind of veering a little bit from maybe what Sydney is imagining the restaurant to be. So I thought it was a really bold choice from Chris and the writers to kind of make Carmi almost more, more siloed in this season. Like he's kind of having his own relationship with Claire. He's kind of figuring out, where his passion, lies. He's going through this trauma. And then, everybody kind of comes together in the end. But it's fun to kind of have a moment to highlight everybody else as well.
Yeah. And then he's literally just stuck in the fridge in the finale.
And then at the end, he literally is isolated. Exactly, exactly.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Sunday, the Sydney episode, like there are two great montages, and then the first one when she's just like eating her way through Chicago. And I'm like, how do you have the time to go through yeah, all these different points? But the second one, it's like when she is like trying to come up with a dish, and I feel like, it's kind of hard to convey like her ideas, like in her head, like visually in like what she's cooking, because we don't know what she's trying to make either. So what are the challenges of editing together someone cooking a new recipe?
Yeah, that was really a montage we struggled with a lot because it was so open-ended. I co-edited that with Naya Amani, who's an amazing editor, and she kind of gave me this great assembly with all these different pieces, and we kind of were trying to distill like how do we make it all go together. So it was really looking for like match cuts, and I was thinking about my own creative process, and like as I'm cutting a scene, I'm thinking about like, oh, this reminds me of this movie I saw and I loved, and it also makes me think of this song, but also this thing from my childhood. And I feel like there's all these little like synapses kind of firing in my head as I'm trying to figure out the best way to tell the story. So that's really what we wanted to show from Sydney being on the architecture tour and seeing, the squares of the windows, and that makes her think of ravioli. And then we have this amazing footage of, this like kind of empty black and we wanted that to feel like her imagination. So like that's in this void in her head, and she's like imagining all these pieces coming together. And then by cutting that with, photos of the ravioli she's made, cutting back to dishes she made in season one, Pantone colors, old architecture plans for, the different buildings that she's passing. It was just a way that we were trying to telegraph like all the different things that are going through her head that go into this dish and also seeing those on screen. So it was a very kind of tricky balancing act to edit because you want it to be abstract, but also be able to follow kind of like the line of her imagination, that thread. It definitely took us a lot of variations, but looking for those match cuts to find similar shapes, similar motions, similar colors. That's when it all kind of started gelling together, and it was able to kind of see that through line that was taking us through her journey.
Yeah, sure. Well, you also cut Fishes, which is like the episode of the season that everyone talks about or traumatized by. It's
Yes.
also the longest episode of the series. It's an hour. So did you know in advance? Like, did Chris tell you like this one's gonna be an hour? And like, how did that affect, your approach to it?
Yeah, when we first started the season, and I was reading the scripts, I didn't really have like a heads up. So just like, oh, season 5 ends and it's like Claire and Carmi finally kiss. Oh my gosh, it's so cute. Like, and then I was just like, trauma flashback. And I was just floored by the episode right away because all of these characters, we were introducing a lot of new people. And as I was seeing the dailies come in, I was like shocked by how authentic it felt that all these people knew each other. And if they weren't blood related, at least they've had these like shared histories and are related through, loving each other and calling each other cousin, even if they're not actually. So, yeah, we had talked about this episode being like the most stressful one of the series yet, and how it should just feel like a pot of water that's like bubbling over. And the whole time throughout the episode, we're just trying to make it more and more tense. There's music underneath almost every scene in that episode because we just want it to feel claustrophobic and like distracting, and you just can't like get a moment of relief. You can't get a breath. And then it culminates in this really long dinner scene at the end. And I was really struggling with how to keep that feeling energetic when we're pretty stationary. But luckily, we usually had like 3 cameras roving at once. So I really just was pouring through the footage, looking for all those little reaction shots of like, you hear someone say a line, but then immediately you're seeing how somebody reacts to it. And then, Sugar is looking at Cicero is looking at Carmi's looking down at his plate. Like there's so much information that could be shared just with seeing how everybody is reacting to this horribly tense situation. So it was so fun. I loved being able to push the limits of how stressed we could be, and the performances. I was just so spoiled too.
Yeah, I think it was really effective to see all of their reaction shots at the dinner table because you just see how uncomfortable everyone is and you like feel like
Yes.
something is gonna erupt and then it's the car crash.
Exactly. And we wanted people to just feel like they were at a seat at the table and they
Yeah.
could kind of look around and be like, oh my gosh, like Mikey's looking pretty angry and Lee's really needling him. And, just feeling like it was like, first it feels like a figurative car crash you can't look away from. Then it obviously becomes an actual car crash you can't look away from either.
Yeah, for sure. Well, the bear is the soundscape of the show is also so great because there's so much, obviously just like restaurant noise in the kitchen. And this season they're building the new restaurant, so there's a lot of construction sounds, but also just like the overlapping dialogue and crosstalk. So, what's it like editing like with and around the audio?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely try to make the audio sound as good as we can before we go to the mix. And I think Adam and I do a lot of temp sound work just because that's so important for feeling whether the tension is actually there or not. And we spend a lot of time trying to get those ambiances feeling like they're actually, authentic to the place. In the Christmas episode, we were always wanted to hear someone just off screen, like arguing or telling a story. And we actually reused some of the audio from season 1 of Mikey telling the story to Richie about running into Bill Murray. We were like, oh, that's like a story he would be telling over and over again. Maybe we can take a little bit of that. So it's really fun to find kind of like creative ways to just make it feel really full and well-rounded. And then we have an amazing post-sound team at Sound Lounge. And, we're always like, wow, this is feeling pretty good. We got a lot of stuff. And then we pass over to them and they add even more things and make it sound even better. So it definitely is important to make you feel like fully immersed, and especially for an episode like Fishes, which should just feel like an hour long, panic attack where everyone is drowning. I think why not use everything at our disposal? And so sound is definitely one of those things we leaned into a lot.
Yeah, for sure. I also love the finale because the first, I think, like 12 or so minutes is a oneer, and you're thinking like, oh, this is gonna be like review again in season 1, but then you have to cut once they like Carmi gets locked in the freezer. It's like, what's gonna happen? So, what like, did you guys? discuss that fake out? Like, we're gonna do this one, or was that always in the cards, like with Chris?
Yeah, so that was definitely the intention of, having that be the finale. And they're like, oh, are they gonna do the same trick again? Are they gonna do this? And I thought it was so brilliant where they decided to change from a oneer into fast cutting, because it seems like we're about to spiral out of control. Like Sydney's overwhelmed, Carmi's in the fridge, nobody's communicating well. And then the moment where Sydney and Richie are kind of like, you know what, we can't fall into this trap again, we need to take control, that's when we start cutting. And we kept calling that the 5-minute montage, because basically they're like, we have 5 minutes to get this together. It's actually longer than 5 minutes, but it's supposed to feel like, the moment of like, okay, we got to get our act together. And as I was showing things to Chris, he was just like, what more can we see? What more can we layer? And so, it's not supposed to be like, okay, all of a sudden they've completely nailed it, it's 100% seamless. It's still a little messy, there's still mistakes being made, but it's supposed to at least feel like, okay, maybe they can do this, maybe they can pull this off. So it's one of those moments in the season that hopefully everyone is just like cheering them on and like, okay, maybe they can make it happen. And I think because you're lulled into this kind of like long one shot, once we start doing those fast cuts, just that contrast and that like change and the momentum and the acceleration, I think people can feel that even more, and it makes it even more exciting.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Joanna, it was great speaking with you. Thanks so much for your time, and we'll see you back here in a little bit.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Joyce.
Lauren Beckett Jackson, editor of The Daily Show, as everyone can see behind you. I think you're sweet.
Trying to decide.
I believe this is your 5th year working on the show.
Almost fourth. Yes. We're
Okay.
close enough.
Yeah, and this season, you guys welcome back Jon Stewart part-time. So what has that been like?
Electric, I think, to say the least. We were not under the impression that he was going to be coming back. He'd had the show on Apple TV, and so we were like, oh, this is not happening. We're going to do this guest host thing. And the day that they announced, he came out, we had a big meeting in the studio, and everyone just kind of blew up, because not only is he a legend here, obviously, but it meant that this next year was going to be something really, really special, and that everyone in the room was going to be a part of it. And so it was just really exciting to have him back, to be a mentor to a lot of the new correspondents that we have in the show. We've got some new talent this year, and then also having his voice this year in particular, being election year, it felt like right. It felt perfect. So it's been awesome to have him back, and we're really excited for what we've made so far and the next few months to come.
Yeah, sure. So how big is the Daily Show editing team?
There's a good chunk of us. There's 10 actually. One of them is primarily on our expansion team, and the other 9 are focused on the show. And so we're kind of a big family bunch. We all come from different backgrounds, which makes the show, I think, a little bit better, because we're always working on, over each other and getting feedback from each other and kind of helping out when somebody needs an extra hand. But it's allowed us to kind of bridge the gap between headlines and a lot of the stuff that we do in our first act with all the news clips that we're putting together. But we're also doing field pieces, we're doing sketches. So it's kind of fun to sit on the lunch line and be like, hey, what are you working on today? Because there's always something new and different. So it's a big bunch, but a good bunch.
So what is like the day-to-day workflow like, editing a live to tape talk show?
It's fun because every day is different. Like, I come in and I might not know what my assignment is until I've booted up my computer. I don't have any advance notice most of the time. And so I'll come in and they'll be like, all right, Lauren, you're on the interview today, or, you're on headlines today. And, as soon as that first Slack message comes in, you're just going until rehearsal and then taping. So it feels very much like we're on this like constant wheel, rotating through, and you're going to get to do 4 or 5 different things in one week, that'll air that night, which is insane.
Yeah. And like a large part of your job is also being super flexible too, because you have no idea if there's going to be like last minute breaking news. So what happens when there is something happening at like 3 p.m. that you need to include tonight?
It's a quick turnaround. And I think a lot of the times, because you have to remember that there's like this huge team behind us. It's not just the editors. We have a ton of producers in our tag department who are actually going through and watching breaking news that's happening, pulling sources, figuring out the best quality that we can get for this clip. Do we have a reporter saying that? All of those things are happening simultaneously when we, have a breaking news story that we want to include. Then the writers have to come in and we're going to rewrite jokes on the fly. We got to include X, Y, and Z now, and kind of getting the correspondent or our host up to speed that day. So there's just a lot of moving parts that happen at the same time, but there is an energy and a fluidity that happens when, when there is breaking news, because we're all kind of waiting for it. And so it's an adrenaline rush essentially, because you have very little time. But you get it together, and you make quick cuts. There might be a few notes, but it's like, we've got to get this on. So you do the best that you can in the time allotted and get it done. But it's definitely a rush.
Yeah. And I have to feel like once you do like get it done and like lock it in, it's like, oh, that was great. It's so
your
like
hands
hectic in the moment. Yeah.
are shaking, but yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So what types of segments have you worked on that have been like edited over a longer period of time, like a couple weeks, that are not included on that night's show?
Yeah, totally. So our field pieces are a big proponent of the show, and they usually span about 5 to 7 minutes or so. And the most recent one that I worked on was the Eric Adams biofilm that actually aired on Tuesday night. And we had time for that. And I think also my producer, Jeff Gussa, who was kind of the brains behind this piece, had been collecting archival actually for years before we actually were able to make it. We have to go through a whole pitch process. And so he was just compiling all of this stuff that he knew one day he'd be able to make this biofilm with. And so I just jumped on the last few months to kind of get that going. And really what we end up doing is if we're doing kind of more of a long form thing, we'll get a little bit more time, but we still don't actually know when it will air, because it's often that we want to air it in the middle of a news cycle where we're referencing the subject. So we were kind of waiting for the right time, but in that moment, you have to, recognize like, how much can we get done? We were going back and forth with the writers on kind of finalizing our jokes and seeing what kind of visuals we had and archival we had that would really work and make those jokes land. But doing that in a way where we could kind of stay abreast of the news cycle in case we had to, hurry up and finish it. But I love that we had some extra time to do it, because it allows you to kind of let your imagination go wild. I think that Daily Show is a format show. And so there's a lot of things that we do very routinely. But the field pieces give you a chance to kind of just run the gamut and try something new, and kind of get your gears going on something that's a little different. And so it's one of the pluses of being an editor here. Is that
it feels like you can do like both types, like the immediate breaking news and then the long form like feature that takes a while. Okay. Well, I mean, you guys still have like rotating hosts. So what is it like editing for like each host's style?
It's fun. I think that everyone has like their own brand that they bring to the show. And so a lot of the times when we're in rehearsal, it's fun to watch. Anyone can come to rehearsal if you have time. And just like hearing how they kind of react and respond to certain jokes, kind of getting that timing down of like when we want to push into something or, take a step back. All of those things are kind of built into the type of correspondent that we have, for instance, I was working on an interview with Ronnie Chang, and he was interviewing Aquafina, and they're like friends. So they had this idea that they were going to do a bit on the interview, and it's, they were kind of going to do this kind of improvisation. And when that happens, you have to kind of be ready for anything. And so, I was kind of just like waiting to see what they were going to do, because I had no idea. We don't usually know. So they're going to be taping it, live, and then we're kind of coming back and seeing like what we can do here and there, and just knowing what kind of camera angles we have at our disposal, making sure that we kind of hold on, any props or shots or whatever. But we had like a whole walkout that Ronnie did because he wanted Aquafina to interview him, which was
their Kung Fu Panda Force co-star.
Yes. And so you kind of want to, give them the time to do that. And it worked out great. And it's one of those things where you just have to kind of roll with it a little bit. So like Ronnie's more of an improv person, and like that's kind of your day-to-day change with all of them. They all have their own style.
Yeah, that was fun, like having her the first half of the interview, like asking him with his like pre-written questions.
Which is great. And we love that we have time to do that. And I think we ended up doing an extended interview that day, just because you want to give them as much time as you want. We've actually heard feedback from guests that come on the show that they enjoy interviewing with us because we allow them to talk. It's not just like, we're not just going to promo your your movie or your book or whatever. We actually just want to have a conversation with you because we have the platform to, you know, put the full interview on digitally, on social media, et cetera. So we have that capability. And then if we don't have the time in the linear version of the show, we can, you know, trim that down. And that also is something that, you know, the editors need to kind of work with to make sure it still feels seamless. But it gives them a chance to kind of relax and just to have a conversation, which I think is what, you know, allows for a ground like the Aqua interview, you know, where
Yeah,
she
for sure. Well, Lauren, it was great speaking with you. Thanks so much for your time. We'll see you back in a little bit.
awesome. Thanks, Joyce.
Well, thank you. Adam Penn, editor of Genius MLKX. You didn't work on the previous seasons, but this season is the first time Genius has covered two figures. So what were discussions like about balancing these two stories of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X?
Yeah, it was interesting, especially from an editorial standpoint. The sort of overarching kind of goal with this season was not to present a museum piece. This is not a filmed textbook, which would be easy to do with these two icons. So what that meant really was kind of getting in there, lifting the layers and getting in there, getting really subjective with sound and with visuals, and presenting sort of the parallels and the differences in these two men who a lot of us know a lot about, but not everything. So it was kind of a fascinating experiment, and also to kind of see how it evolved from the script form. Because initially, especially with the first episode, there was a lot of intercutting between the two. Scene with Martin, scene with Malcolm, bounce back and forth. And then we put that all together and it's like, it's cool, it's great, the actors are great, but it doesn't, bouncing around so much doesn't allow us to get kind of emotionally invested in these guys. So we did a lot of playing around in the cutting room and moving scenes around, and we ended up with kind of just going with there's a little intercutting at the top, and then we kind of go on a run with Malcolm for a while and just get into his story and see his, you know, the origins of him and his philosophy, and then we kind of switched gears and went to Martin, and then kind of at the end we did a little more intercutting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the premiere, you know, you're covering from their childhoods up, you know, like through college essentially. So there is like a lot of footage because it's not just like, you know, one like day in their lives or something. So what was it like deciding what pieces to use and like how much to highlight like in their childhood and like or in their adolescence?
There was a lot more than what ended up in the cut, and a lot of it was, all the actors were great, but we also wanted to get, you know, our two leads, the Aaron and Kelvin are spectacular, and we wanted to get to them because, you know, they're so amazing. So what that meant was, I believe almost every scene of the two as children were represented in the finished show, but some were more pieces. Like we kind of little snippets of larger scenes that ended up in there.
Mm-hmm. I think something that's so interesting about the show is that, or actually like, in real life, the two of them only met once, and the show doesn't invent another meeting or anything between them. And it's obviously showing these parallel stories of them and showing how they have a lot in common, even though on the surface they seem very different. So what challenges does that present to you as an editor when your leads only interact once on screen, but you're trying to tell a unified story?
Yeah, it was interesting, because I usually take my cues in the cutting room from the performances as far as like just the rhythm of everything. And both actors had different styles. Aaron was very kind of serious and, you know, just very serious and intense. And Kelvin was was warmer and looser. And so it was sort of a balance of kind of presenting them a little differently, but also, you know, narratively there are parallels. They both were largely influenced by their fathers and their mothers somewhat too. So kind of the parallels were narrative, but the differences were hopefully represented in the style that we presented each storyline.
Mm-hmm. I think it's also like a testament, to the editing, in here and like some other shows where like leads don't interact, but you're so immersed in the story that you don't even realize that they're not interacting, Like, is that something you're thinking about too? Is like, I know they're not gonna share the screen again, but we still need to make it feel like they are.
Yeah, I mean, they're both the leads, so it's like it's important to make it feel that way, which was a challenge, but I think it worked out, and a lot of that is because of how kind of similar their trajectories were, and then you kind of watch them veer, which was really cool.
Mm-hmm. And you also edited the 5th episode, which focuses on their wives, Coretta Scott King and Betty Shabazz, and it's very similar to the premiere. Like we see them from their youth to adulthood. So, what was your approach to that one, showing everything from their perspective?
It was honestly a similar approach. Again, taking my cues from the actors and their performances. As far as that's where I start. It's my starting point. But then, yeah, just kind of getting in there and trying to make it as subjective and non-textbooky as possible. One thing I loved about this show is that I feel like every episode kind of had a different vibe. I did a later episode that was almost like a paranoid 70s thrill, like The Conversation. So it was just really fun to kind of take this one story, but present it in all these different ways throughout their lives.
Mm-hmm. And you worked with, or there are other editors who worked on the show. So what was like passing the baton off to them and like getting the baton back from them and like also seeing their cuts of their episodes?
It was cool. I mean, we all ultimately took our cues from the showrunners and producers, Reggie, Gina, and Dame and Raph. But there was a lot of conversations with other editors throughout as far as music, temp score, sound, all those little details that you don't necessarily consciously think about that are there. And it was fun to kind of set the tone. Like I said earlier, this sort of subjective nature, like getting in these guys' heads a little bit, and then sort of seeing how that plays out throughout the rest of the series.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. What was your favorite scene to cut for the show?
Well, I loved cut. There's a lot of speeches in this season, a lot, and I loved cutting them. I was very nervous cutting them because a speech can be really boring, but it wasn't in this case. Like just watching somebody give a speech, but the actors were great, and it was just fun to kind of navigate, at least from an editing standpoint, when to sort of step on the gas cutting wise in these speeches and when to kind of lay off, let the actors do their thing. I particularly love Malcolm's speech in prison towards the end of the first episode. That was a really fun one. And I mean, again, it was daunting. There was so much footage for that speech and for all the speeches, really. Took quite a while to put together, but it was really rewarding because it's like, again, it's like it's a little nerve-wracking. A speech can go off the rails, and it didn't. The actors really held it, and hopefully I supported that in my job as well.
Yeah, I love that the cut from that speech because he's just so energized and loud. He's like screaming basically in the prison, and then it cuts to Martin, and it's just like so low key and quiet. So it's like the energy change is really great as well. Well, was there anything you learned about either Martin Luther King or Malcolm X from working on the show that you didn't know before?
Oh yeah, that was one of the most exciting things about working on this. For instance, I had no idea that Martin tried to take his own life as a child. Like which is, I mean, he was just racked with guilt at his grandma dying, and it's just it's a shocking thing to see. I never knew that happened, but it also really humanizes this icon that which was the goal of the show. We want to humanize these people and showing their triumphs, their flaws, their tragedies, all that stuff. So that's the one that sticks out. I think about that quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like many people probably didn't know that, and so it's probably jarring to see it in the premiere.
Yeah.
Well, Adam, it was great speaking with you. Thanks so much for your time. We'll see you back in a little bit.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tim Murrell, editor of A Gentleman in Moscow. The show is an adaptation of Amortal's bestseller. Had you read the book before this?
I hadn't read it before. I'd heard of it, but I hadn't read it. So so I read the script first because that's what I was sent before I met Sam Miller, the director. But I read the book after that because I don't always do that when I'm working on something that's been adapted. But it can be really useful and kind of give you just an insight into character and and settings and sort of other nuggets of character that don't make it through to the script that can really help inform how you look at certain scenes and how things are played and how things develop. So I love the novel and obviously things get changed in adaptations, it's a different form and all of those things, but I felt that the spirit of the novel was beautifully carried through by Ben Vanstone, the sort of main writer and showrunner. So.
Mm-hmm. So why did you decide to read this one? And did you hesitate? Like, were you like, should I or should I not?
What, in terms of reading the novel?
Yeah.
Just because it's because I love the script and it felt like a book I then wanted to read because I only had a script for one episode at that point and I wanted to know more.
That means it's a great script. You want more.
Yeah, exactly. And I felt this was like a couple of other adaptations I've done. It was just really a really valuable thing. But I fell in love with the book and the characters in a really good way. So yeah, it was a worthwhile choice.
Mm-hmm. Well, you edited the premiere and, you have the responsibility of setting up the story and the tone for the whole show. So what were what did you and Ben Vanstone, the showrunner, discuss about the premiere?
Yeah, and Sam Miller, the director too. It was just really, we didn't really discuss, and we didn't have a big tone meeting beforehand or anything. I think the tone and the kind of, the sort of feel of the show was very inherent in the script. And then immediately in Ewan's performance. So it was really, the challenges of this show were kind of dealing with a character who's a man of many masks, who kind of is certainly at the beginning of the story very cloaked in the sort of manners and kind of traditions of his era, a man of originally wealth and great standing, and he's clinging on to those as the world around him has kind of been destroyed, and we slowly reveal who he really is, but you have to get to know him a little bit quicker than that in order for the audience to access him. But there were some wonderful scenes of him just on his own where the mask would slip and just little beats of, and Ewan was wonderful at calibrating those and giving us these moments of just, you knew there was some sort of sadness behind that kind of mask and sort of, so those gave us access. Plus he's also a very funny character and kind of quite brave at the beginning of the show and the way he's standing up to a world around him that just wants to tear him down and basically kill him. And he seems to be dealing with that with great humour. So it was using those access points to help us kind of get into what's quite an alien world, I guess, for a lot of the audience and, and all of the sort of the barriers of it's the revolution. And he seems to be some sort of, a man of any man of great wealth and power you don't immediately feel empathy for necessarily. But I think the sort of main jumping in point was through Ewan, and just, when it's funny, enjoying the humour, as long as it's coming through character and circumstance, not sort of trying to ever push that stuff too heavily, just allowing it to come through naturally through the story, but making sure you do enjoy it and understand it when it happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Ewan is so great in the role, and you really get a sense of the Count's like humanity through all the episodes. So what is it like when you have a great central performance, like, and editing around that? Like, does it just make your job so much easier?
Well, absolutely, because Ewan was just fundamentally wonderful as the Count, and it's not an easy role to play because his journey is quite an internal one, and as you said, it's the humanity of the man is the kind of core of the story, and as the sort of the world order that he knew and clung to so heavily is kind of torn away, he's someone who learns to find a new world that's almost within him, rather than all of the external things that he was used to in terms of large houses and sort of, coach and horses and servants and all of these things. These servants then become his friends. He finds kind of love and happiness in the strangest of corners. And this sort of young girl is the one who takes him through and teaches him all of these things. And just Ewan was just brilliant at giving that central performance that the show definitely needs. He's in virtually every scene all the way through the 8 hours. And to calibrate that journey over 8 hours was done wonderfully.
Yeah, and there's so much passing of time too in every episode as well.
Yeah, exactly. There's some quite big leaps where he's suddenly now he's suddenly a servant, where he was dining in that restaurant in the previous episode, which I think was a clever way of moving the story on. But yeah, he was brilliant, and so that makes that job easy. But as you talk to any actor, then you've got like 10 great takes. Which do you use? And it's finding all of those tiny nuances and things that you feel, well, this one is better than the last one. They're all great, but let's go here. And that was always a joy. And then the supporting cast, with Mary Elizabeth Winstead and kind of Faith Badigan and Johnny Harris. I mean, they're all really, really good. And so everyone kind of, it just spread throughout the whole cast. They were all fantastic. So that side of the job was always a pleasure.
Mm-hmm. Well, the premiere also includes these flashbacks and teases of what happened to his sister. So how do you go about figuring out how much to tease for the audience without giving everything away?
Well, there was kind of a debate around that, and in terms of should they be more narrative and should they have their own little story journeys within them. But we felt Sam particularly and Ben were very convinced that these should be fragments of memory, like real memories are. They're not, you don't remember a scene from your past, you remember emotions and feelings and the sort of texture of the sun hitting your face and the sound of something coming through, but everything's very subjective. So they were shot from a very singularly subjective point of view, which was the Count's point of view. You never saw him, which was a great way in, and immediately told you what sort of world you're in when you were in those flashbacks, but obviously makes cutting around them quite difficult because you've got a sort of singular point to come from. But we soon found you could be quite jagged with them if you wanted. You could leave them as kind of more flowing and sort of gentle moments if that worked better. And obviously we played around with them quite a lot in terms of when they happened and what content we used in which episodes. So things got moved around quite a lot, experimented a fair amount with them, but they were a wonderful resource for accessing that sadness behind the Count's kind of, outer sort of mask.
Mm-hmm, yeah, sure. There's also this great montage in the premiere. I love a good montage, and it's like capturing his first, I think, 46 days in the hotel, and the pace quickens very quickly. Yes. So can you talk about putting that together?
Yes, that was a lot of fun. It took a while to get all the pieces for that, just because of the shooting schedule, even though the first 2 episodes were shot first, because of how we were building the sets and all of those things, that some of that material took a while to come through. But it was just became a great opportunity to kind of allow a burst of energy into a world that could sometimes become quite kind of staid and sort of what it never did in the show, but it could do. It's a man trapped in the interior of a hotel.
Yeah, because it's like his ritual, so it could get kind of boring. But the pace of the montage, it made it feel exciting.
Yeah, well, that was the point, was to kind of see him kind of sort of almost seize the day a bit, as the way the Count would. His character's very much kind of just take what's in front of you and sort of stiff up a lip and get on with it and kind of make the best, and which he starts to do. And then as the sort of pace quickened, it then delivers him out into this kind of rather sad wide shot where he's suddenly like, whatever he tries to do to occupy, it's always the same thing, and it keeps being the same thing. And there's a point where whatever face he puts on when he goes downstairs, when he's up in his little attic room, life is not going to get any better here. He
Yeah,
thinks.
like he can't go outside. Like he can do all this,
Yeah.
he can get a haircut, get shaved, but still
Yes.
can't go outside.
There's a very strict limit to the joy one can get from those things. So yeah, it was a lot of fun to edit, and we sort of decided to use quite bold music in the temp music when we first put it together, and then Federica Usid, our wonderful composer, just wrote this fantastic tune to go kind of that sort of any love for the temp was eviscerated by the brilliance of what he came up with. So
it's a beautiful score. The score for the show in general, yeah, for sure. Well, Tim, it was great speaking with you. Thanks so much for your time. We'll see you back in a little bit.
Thank you.
Thank you. Alex Trudeau-Viriato, you previously edited Man in the Arena, and I know John Bon Jovi loved that docuseries, and he wanted the same team for Thank You, Goodnight, the Bon Jovi Story. So how did it feel to know that he essentially handpicked you for this?
It was a good feeling. I remember I was standing right here when I got the phone call that John Bon Jovi wants you to tell his story. And you go through a lot of emotions at that time, like that work paid off, or that you took a chance on this other project, and now you're watching it come to fruition. And what does he want us to do, or what does that look like? What is Bon Jovi's story? What do I not know? And you kind of get into like excitement research mode to figure out where you're at.
Well, with docs, like you have to build the story yourself, and you guys started filming in like 2022, and that's when he started having his vocal cord issues, and he has surgery. So how did you and Gautam Chopra, the director, like land on these parallel timelines for the series of showing the band's rise, and then the present timeline with his health issues?
I think it goes to what I was just saying, was that was the first thing I asked myself, is what does this documentary have to say, other than, oh, look how big they got in the 80s and everybody knows Slippery When Wet, and look, they made it to the top, and look how great that is. It all kind of came together when he started having those vocal issues, and we realized that was going to be an A story and a B story, that we were going to take you through the 80s and we're going to have that fun, and that was great. But that would almost be the easier story to tell, because we could find that archival, we could dig into that, and we could share the stories, and we could interview all the band members. But then there's this other ticking time bomb of his voice. Is John Bon Jovi ever going to sing again? And that's what I really wanted to tap into, was people can't relate to being the greatest band in the world or rock star lifestyle, but they can relate to not being able to do the thing they love anymore. And you're watching that guy go through that in real time. He just happens to also be John Bon Jovi. So you use it as a tool to either juxtaposition something that was happening in the 80s, look how great he was doing then, and look at he's having a hard time now, or to complement it. Similar challenges were happening back then to today. And that was really the balance of our A and B story, and how often we would cut between the two to really create a unique story that had both the stakes of 2022 and the stakes of what they were going through in the 80s, and the hard work that it took to get there.
Yeah, because like you said, when you're filming, you're obviously going through it in real time, and now we know like he's recovered and he's okay. But like when you're in that moment, like 2 years ago, it's like, what are you thinking? Like like the footage you were getting of this, and like you don't know where their story's gonna go.
Yeah, there was always an open-ended ending. I was also a firm believer that it also didn't really change what we were going to do up until that point. Whether if at the end of a documentary he said, I'm retired, I'm not going to do it, there was still a hero's journey to that point for the whole band and for him. And if he continued and was like, I'm great and 100%, here comes the next tour, so be it. We would do that as well. But it was always a moving piece. Where are we going to end? Like, what? Eventually we have to stop making this documentary. We have to end somewhere, and it's not going to be we didn't believe it was going to be some final goodbye. We could see progress, we could see things. We had a hunch, but everything was a moving target. Or how the rehearsal was going to go. Was this going to be a good one? Was this, because you don't always want to stay in the down. You needed to come up. You needed to go down. You needed to do that, but you never knew what John, what was going to happen with John's voice.
One of my favorite scenes is after he has the surgery, and he had just seen the movie Elvis, and he loved it, and he's reflecting on Elvis, the real Elvis, and how he had health issues, but he never lost his voice, and then he died at 42. And John says he'd rather still be here in his 60s trying to rebuild his voice, and he wants to try. And there are so many raw moments like that from him, And, you know, it's really covering like a career of ups and downs, like you were saying. So when you get these, you know, real emotional moments from him, this footage, like, are you thinking, oh man, this is definitely going in, like it's never getting cut?
Yeah, the Elvis one particularly was one of the first 3 scenes I had sent to John. So when John asked us to do it, we had one interview and then we had whatever archival we can get off the internet. And I made 3 scenes for cadence, style, music choices, and just kind of like, this is kind of how I see this going. What, you know, is where do we want to go from here? And the Elvis one was something I really liked because I could tap into like that one sentence really meant a lot to me. Like, what is it that you have that you would be okay? You'd rather have these things than your voice. Like, what are those things? And that's the documentary. Like, that's part of John's story. Tell me what those things are that you'd rather have than just your voice and nothing else, as his Elvis example. And Elvis pops up quite a bit. I put he's in an image in episode 1. He gets married at an Elvis chapel. I really tried to sprinkle little Elvis moments throughout because you can see him relating to him, singing, acting. There's a lot in there. I even had a temp Elvis track in one of the earlier cuts just because I felt like that was a thread. I know he says he doesn't want to end up with the fat Elvis, but there's definitely some connections there to him. So yeah, that scene, along with the one on the couch, I remember when he's processing everything that this band means to all the people, and he starts to get teary-eyed, and he says, like, I'm not gonna let you see me like this, kind of a thing. I remember there was a suggestion one time, someone was like, oh, what if we cover it with all the people that he's talking about? And it was like, absolutely not. We're not leaving the main character. He's trying not to cry. You never leave someone when they're trying not to cry. You don't cut to whatever they're talking about. That's completely irrelevant. Let them just sit with John. Let John be vulnerable. This is the kind of relationship that Gotham has built with John to have access to these kinds of moments. We're sitting, we're not cutting to anything.
Hmm. How much footage did you have between the interviews with him and all the band members and, you know, like the managers, everybody, you know, Obi, and then the archival footage too, because we see in the show that he's archiving stuff himself, you know, I'm sure he's like sending you stuff. It's like, here, this is the unused song for a Robin Williams movie.
Yeah, when you see the pictures of the basement, we thought, you know, it was going to be this like, all right, here's a big box of archival, get after it. But it was not like that. It was 5 clips here, 50 clips the different week, no clips for the next 2 weeks. And so you're constantly guessing what's going to come in, but you got to work with what you have, because if it never comes in, you still have to have something to show. Excuse me. And so we had multiple interviews with John that were all over an hour long. Every band member did an over an hour, sometimes over 2-hour interview. And so you're just trying to comb through how you fit this into a 5-hour piece. And then the archival, sometimes there are archival moments which are much more rich, but you kind of have to spread that throughout. You know, people wanted to see these like raw behind the scenes of Slippery When Wet. And it was like, well, that didn't exist. They started recording on VHS and all these tapes for the New Jersey album. So like we can show that then. But something with the archival I wanted to do early on was not just limit it to the years that were being talked about. So in the 80s, I wanted to use interviews from John in episode 1, even though we hadn't chronologically got to that moment. As long as he was speaking on the chronological story, I would show you him in the 80s. I would show you him when the band was successful from an interview, so that that style and that look gets sprinkled throughout the whole series. And the archival wasn't just limited to the one time they were in 1986. And all 1986 footage needs to go in the scene with Slippery When Wet. It could really live throughout it, so all the rich moments could be sprinkled, as long as they were relevant and worked for the story.
Mm-hmm. I also love how the other band members, like it's like they're in conversation when they're recounting, you know, the past.
Mm-hmm.
Like I love that editing style too.
Yeah, because we never wanted to be just John telling you the story and then everyone else gets to chime in. Oh yeah, I remember that, or I did it. I wanted it to feel like a conversation because they were never in the same room. Everyone got their own space to say whatever stories they wanted, and sometimes they would contradict each other, and sometimes it wouldn't line up. And it's not my job to tell someone that they're truthful or not, but I can't lose the audience. I can't contradict, so it doesn't make any sense.
That's just their truth, how they explain.
Yeah, exactly. It's that's the perfect term. It's like their truth, and I have to let that blend together. And so you wanted to make it feel like they were talking to each other, even though they weren't in the same room. So I let David finish John's sentence. I let Richie chime in, and with all 3 of them, and you can cut between all 3, and it feels like they're all just telling you this story that they really remember vividly. And I wanted them to feel like a band at all times, never John, and then everybody else. It's
Mhm.
just everyone else together. Everyone gets a little bit of an origin story. Everyone gets to speak on these moments from their perspective.
Yeah, sure. Well, lastly, what's your favorite Bon Jovi song?
Oh God. Well, I listened to all of them.
All
I
of
went
them.
through, I went from Spotify, I went from the top to the bottom, and then John played some of the ones that we had never heard. Favorite. I was asked which one was my favorite that I didn't know of before the documentary.
That
And I
works too.
think Dry County was something that I had never heard of, and I really liked it. And it's funny enough, I didn't find a place for it in the documentary. Like you have all these songs, you're like, we're gonna play this one, that one, and some they just don't talk about, or they just don't have a moment to
Yeah,
live.
it's like a B-side, like a deep cut.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and well, it wasn't even a deep cut because some people are like, "Oh my God, that song was huge out here." But for me, it was like I was born in 1984. It was 2 years. I was 2 years old when they were like skyrocketing. So I remember them from Crush in high school. So that was my first album, and then I had to go to Tower Records and buy the New Jersey album, and then I found them that way. So my experience of their music happens different than every other fan's experience, and like that was part of the filmmaking too, is not trying to appease all the fans and all the experience and all the songs, like, oh, you didn't play this song. That was going to be impossible, that we were never going to be able to make every fan happy because they all have different songs and favorites.
Hmm. That's a good one though. That not many people name that one, so
No, yeah, I mean, I could easily name the top 10, but what fun would that be?
yeah. Yeah. Well, Alex, it was great speaking with you. Thanks so much for your time. Welcome to our Meet the Experts editing panel. Today we're joined by Joanna Naugle from The Bear, Lauren Beckett Jackson from The Daily Show, Adam Penn from Genius MLKX, Tim Murrell from A Gentleman in Moscow, and Alex Trudeau-Viriato from Thank You, Goodnight, The Bon Jovi Story. Thank you all for being here. Well, we often hear about how difficult it is to cut things from films, shows, get things down for time or streamline the story or whatever. So what was the hardest thing you've ever had to cut in any project? Let's start with Joanna.
Oh, wow, that is such a tough question. I think starting out, I did some like documentary cutting, and it's just so hard, I think, to not have a script to go back to. And it's so fun to have things be so open-ended, but also at the same time, like I'm so lucky on The Bear, we have amazing scripts to go back to. So, kudos to the unscripted editors on the panel because yeah, it just takes so much more finessing and so much more big picture to be like, okay, we're building this house as we're also cutting it, whereas I at least have like the blueprint to start from. So definitely admire documentary editors a lot.
It was a horror film with killer kids in, and that was a nightmare to cut. The director said to me just before we started, he said, I'm going to do most of it in camera. We'll be in and out in like 6 weeks. 6 months later, we were still trying to find the movie, and we broke it down and rebuilt it so many times in so many different ways. But it was awful for a long time, but when we found the movie, it was brilliant. And I probably learned more doing that than on any other sort of TV show or movie that I've done.
6 months, Jesus. Lauren, how about you?
I would say, I think I agree with Joanna that documentary is the hardest. I think just because there's so much archival coming at you and you're trying to figure out what's going to be the most impactful, what's going to kind of, in our instance for comedy, like what's going to bring the most laughs. And I did a documentary very early in my career that was about the Greek Civil War, and it was entirely in Greek. And I don't speak any Greek. As you might have guessed. And so I had to kind of sit with the director every day, and she would kind of go through some of the interviews with me, and we'd have to kind of go back and forth on what might work, what music might work here, what B-roll we can use to enhance the story. But a lot of it was also then part of this huger, like much more big archival project that had animations in it as well. There was narration. And so just kind of trying to pull all those elements in and make them a story that you want to tell, and getting the director's vision right. This was something that was near and dear to her heart, so you don't want to butcher it. You want to make sure that you give her the essence that your visionary essence that they're trying to create. So documentary is definitely, I think, the hardest form.
And it was literally Greek to you in that case.
Literally Greek. Yeah.
Adam, how about you?
I'm actually going to jump on the documentary thing a little bit as well. Number of years ago, I cut People versus O.J. Simpson, the story, and which was a great experience, really fun. And the opening of the pilot of that was it was all archivals, Rodney King, LA riots, all that stuff, and it it had to set the tone. It was basically backstory for the entire series that followed. So it was kind of a crucial thing to get right. And I had tons of footage. Took quite a while to build this little sequence together, but in the end, I was really proud of it and really happy with what happened with what came out of it. And I do think it succeeded in kind of setting the tone and backstory for everything that followed in that season.
Yeah, sure. Great show. Alex, how about you?
Well, as much as
the
I
person with
appreciate the
doc-
validation that documentary editing is hard, I can't say it's hard to do it. At least I'm doing it in English, not in Greek. That sounds, I don't know if I have anything harder than that. But I think I don't know any other world now. For me, it's the opposite now. Now I think, it's been so long since I've cut anything scripted. Going back and having someone tell me, this is what happens in the scene, and these are the words that need to happen here, and not having this open sandbox. If I can say whatever I want in this, as long as it's been said in the world, and as long as it exists on a clip, those are sentences and words that I have to my access, and I can just put that in. And I thought about the other day of just imagine going back to a script, or imagine going back to a scene where it's like this happens and then this happens. I haven't experienced that in years now that I've been in documentaries, and I've kind of questioned what I would be like going back into that. Like it'd be kind of scary to be told this is what needs to happen here, and these are the things.
Yeah.
So I think it's just what you're used to. I'd be more fearful to go back into scripted.
You don't want to know the ending. You
Yeah,
wanna,
it became this kind of creative, open area there. I could just try it. Let's start the whole movie with this scene. Let's
Mhm.
start that scene with this one clip I just found randomly on YouTube. Let's throw that in there, and just now that's kind of how my brain works, and now that's kind of how I see these pieces.
That still happens in scripted as well.
The endings can
It's not
change.
with the end.
Yeah.
Well, I want to talk about trailers and sizzle reels. Like I know marketing
no.
departments, oh no, usually cut those, but I'm assuming you've all had experience cutting those types of things. But it's, it's still a different skill set and with different goals, obviously. So when have you been like the most surprised, good or bad, by the way a trailer was cut for one of your projects?
I think it's
I don't
always
know.
fun.
Oh, go ahead,
sorry.
John. Go ahead, John. Yeah.
Oh, no. I was gonna say, I think it's always fun, like when I see the trailer for a show, because a lot of times they'll use the same lines but different takes than what's in the cut. And I'm like, oh, whoa, that was a cool take. Should I have used that? And then I spiral a little bit and I'm like, no, we chose the right one for the scene. But it's just fun to be like, it's a little bit like parallel universe where you're like, oh, right, they use like this coverage we never cut to. So I remember thinking that when the Bear season 2 trailer came out, and it was just like so fun to be like, this is the show that we've been cutting, but a slightly different take on it. But not to interrupt you.
I was just gonna say, in documentary, I feel like it's just a ticking time bomb before you get the producers who are like, so about the sizzle, and you're like, all right, well, I mean, we're in the middle of episode 3, and now it's like sizzle. And for me, I have so much respect for trailer editors for the way they're looking for things and they're watching. I worked at next door to Jack's, where they were making the Joker trailer and the House of Cards, and you're just listening to the same thing over and over and over for months for like a 1-minute trailer. So it almost feels like, let them do, like, yes, us editors, we can cut a trailer, we can cut a sizzle. And I know you think, because I know all the footage, because we're in it, that makes me the right person for this, but it's a different, I feel it's almost like a different muscle, looking for that sizzle material, cutting it at the pace for that. You have to really stop down, get out of like story, long form, whatever this is, get out of that zone, then get into trailer. And sometimes that takes a beat, and takes a minute, and like the sound design and what's working and what trailers are out now and what's the best way to do it now. I feel like it's just a little bit of a different mindset, and sometimes that takes a little bit longer than expected.
Yeah, because the whole point is to tease this thing and to get people interested, which is not necessarily, the project itself. It's like,
Right. And you love to see a good trailer of what you're working on done by someone else. And like, oh, they got it. They picked all the things, and now this is amazing thing promoting this thing I've been on for 2 years. Perfect. Like, go Disney marketing or Hulu marketing or whatever it is, and like, good job.
I mean, the Bon Jovi trailer was great, so.
They did a great job. That was one of my most memorable, like great experiences with a marketing team who was in tune to what we were doing and had all these little shorter trailers. And every time we saw one, it was like, oh, yep, that's it. Just send. And it was really satisfying.
Adam, how about you?
Yeah, I've never cut a trailer, but I did about 10 years ago. I cut a movie for HBO called The Normal Heart, and I threw a song in there. Roxy Music's More Than This. I just threw it into the movie, and it played really well, and I was very excited by it. And then, a year or so later, the trailer comes out, and it is set to that song, and I felt that was my little contribution to the trailer. I was very excited at that they chose that song.
It's like validated.
Yeah.
Tim, how about you?
Well, I've had good and bad experiences with trailers. Just sometimes a trailer will be presented and you're thinking, that's not really what we're making. So you kind of, so that can happen, particularly sort of sales trailers for movies you're working on or something. But they can be really, really fantastic. And like the others have said, find moments. And I always kind of want to see what they've done, because there may be a shot, some context of something. I'm going, oh, wow, that's brilliant. A slight moment of, why didn't I think of that? And then now I want to use it. I did a movie a year and a half ago that then kind of wasn't going anywhere, we didn't think, or there was kind of got stuck in various kind of issues. And then the trailer came out this year and it was brilliant. And it suddenly the movie was suddenly going to come out. So that was a really exciting thing. And I thought they nailed the trailer. It was fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Lauren, how about you?
I also don't have as much trailer experience, so that's harder. But I guess from a reality standpoint, because I came from reality TV, I've been asked to do sizzles where we're trying to sell a show to a network. And so there's a lot of cooks there because we don't quite have the funding yet. And so things don't look as great as you would imagine. And so you're trying to kind of enhance things, trying to get to the nitty-gritty of who these main characters are, why they're going to be interesting, and trying to sell that in 4 or 5 minutes. And so that's kind of something that it's not my favorite thing to do. I think I was like, development, I don't think that's for me. So I quickly moved away from it, but it is kind of fun to just try new things and just see if you can make these characters sing, and without a script. It kind of gives you the freedom to do that. So it is kind of fun to just stir the pot, see what comes out. But it's probably not my favorite art form.
Well, unfortunately, we have to wrap, but it was great speaking with all of you today. Congratulations on all of your shows. Thank you so much, and have a great day.
Thank you.
And
Thank
thank
you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.